The lecture hall shimmered faintly under the pressure of too many biosystems crammed into a room designed by a species that never perspired. The air smelled like sterilized ammonia and warmed metal. 23 students sat in crescent rows, scaled, furred, feathered, and one conspicuously pale-skinned cluster of humans. Professor Yerval adjusted his breathing shroud and flicked his 3 eyes toward the human section. "This next question," he said, "is designed to provoke moral introspection, not confession." A few tentacles twitched. The Illyrian ambassador's daughter leaned forward in anticipation. The Gorth twins stopped tapping notes on their shared console. Yerval's voice dropped slightly. "Who here," he asked, "has killed?" There was a long silence. Then every human raised a hand. Except one. He sat at the end of the row, clean uniform, no visible scars, posture too still. His hands stayed in his lap, his eyes didn't move. The silence cracked into something colder. Alien students shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. One of the Gorth twins let out a low-frequency warble of distress. Professor Yerval blinked once, slowly. "I see." He had meant the question hypothetically, but the humans, as usual, had made it real. Lars didn't move. A pale human in Institute issued medical whites, his short blonde hair tucked neatly behind one ear, his badge clean and clipped. He looked less like a combatant and more like a technician misplaced into the wrong module. Yerval composed himself. "Perhaps we should begin again. I would like volunteers to share, if you feel comfortable." The first hand to stay raised belonged to Colonel Vega, who wore her uniform like a second skin and had a crisscross scar from her temple to her jaw, tight and silvery. "I was flying logistics for the Eleusis evac when a fire broke out in Corridor 6. We couldn't get the doors open from command. I made the call to vent it." She looked around the room, voice steady. 4 humans, 1 Ernari, 2 Tesheli larvae. They'd have burned alive otherwise. I watched their vitals cut. No emotion, no bragging, just data. Several aliens recoiled. One of the Silesh students whispered to another in their melodic tongue. The translation bracelet skipped a beat. Yerval gave a slow nod. "A tactical necessity, but still a moral act. Thank you." Next was Gregor, a former lunar miner whose neck still had the pale indentations of safety harnesses. "Survival brawl on Deimos. 1 atmospheric breach suit between 3 of us. We drew lots. Then the loser tried to take the suit anyway." He shrugged. He didn't make it. An Illyrian raised a frilled brow. "You fought to the death?" "No, I tried to run." He didn't. More hands. A diplomat's guard who had shot during a hostage crisis. A terraformer who had authorized the elimination of an aggressive invasive species that turned out to be semi-sentient. A pilot who rammed a pirate ship trying to breach their cargo hull. Yerval's expression remained unreadable, but his body language grew still. To his left, the Falari student curled his eye stalks tight against his head. You all have taken life?" he asked quietly, speaking around the static of cultural disbelief. Vega answered, "We didn't choose to take life. We were put in situations where doing so saved more." "I don't understand," murmured the Falari. "There's always an alternative to death." "I wish that were true," said Gregor. Another silence. The humans weren't gloating, but their clarity rattled the others. Eventually, the Gorth twin on the left twitched a massive eye toward Lars. "You did not raise your hand." It wasn't an accusation. More confusion, suspicion, even. All eyes turned to him. Lars didn't speak at first. He just sat there, spine too straight, like someone trying not to collapse under their own weight. Then, slowly, he stood. "I haven't killed," he said. "Not because I'm better, because I've never had to." The words didn't lighten the room. If anything, they darkened it. "But," he continued, "I've watched more die than anyone else in this hall." Yerval tilted his head, uncertain. "I don't follow." Lars nodded, as if he expected that. "I'm a trauma medic. I specialize in frontline collapse triage. My job isn't to kill or defend. It's to keep the dying alive." A few aliens blinked, uncertain whether to feel relieved or horrified. Lars's voice was calm, but something behind it vibrated. Not anger, not sorrow, weariness, the kind you can't sleep off. "I was stationed during the Defari orbital collapse. 18,000 people trapped under drifting bulkheads and failed supports. We had 500 medkits, 3 auto-surgical units, no anesthesia. For 2 rotations, we pulled survivors from vacuum fractures and hull fires. We had to decide who had a chance and who didn't. We marked the ones we couldn't save. Just a red dot on their collar, so we wouldn't waste time trying again. And then we moved on. The Gorth twin emitted a choked chirp. Lars's hands, still at his sides, tightened. I once had to leave a 10-year-old girl with a crushed lung to save a man with intact organs. I listened to her breathing slow while I stabilized him. She thanked me anyway. No one moved. I've performed 37 surgeries under flashlight. I've sterilized tools and engine coolant. I've lost patients mid-procedure because someone tried to rush the barricade, and we had to evacuate mid-suturing. I've used my own blood volume to keep a transfusion running, because the bank ran dry. He looked up finally. I didn't raise my hand because I've never taken a life, but every day I live with the ones I couldn't save. Yirval opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. His gaze flicked across the humans, their quiet, collected expressions, the stillness that didn't come from arrogance but experience. One of the alien students whispered something into their translator. "What was that?" Yirval asked gently. The translator hesitated, then offered, "He carries the dead differently." No one disagreed. Lars didn't sit back down. He simply stepped aside, giving space. Vega looked at him, then slowly lowered her hand. One by one, the others followed, their stories already told, their truths laid bare. The room didn't buzz with debate. It pulsed with reconsideration. Concepts like honor and morality were being melted and reforged in real time. At the front, Yirval stared at his syllabus. His 3-fingered hand hovered over the display. Then, with a slow exhale through his rebreather, he tapped the stylus. A new line appeared. Week 12. The Ethics of Humanity. Mandatory for all species. As the students filed out, some stunned, some quiet, a few offering brief nods to the humans they passed Lars, who remained near the edge of the room. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence around him was not discomfort. It was respect. The next ethics lecture was moved to a larger hall. Not because of attendance, though it had tripled. Not because of security, although 2 more guards now stood unobtrusively near the rear. It was the air circulation. After last week, several species had lodged olfactory complaints too much emotional stress emitted into a confined space, they said. Their glands couldn't cope with that level of human tension. Lars arrived 10 minutes early, as always. He took the same seat, last row, far right, back straight. The humans had started spacing out more since the question. They didn't clump together anymore. Too many alien eyes. Even Vega had stopped sitting up front. Professor Yirval entered precisely on the rotation's half mark, his motions more restrained than usual. He didn't open with a quote or abstract this time, just a long pause and then a quiet observation. I did not realize how unprepared I was to teach this class. The humans didn't react. The aliens exchanged uncertain glances. I believed ethics was universal, Yirval said slowly, that the preservation of life and avoidance of violence were common denominators across species. But I've encountered complexity. He turned to the board. A hollow display expanded to show 4 overlapping ethical frameworks, each from a different homeworld. Some used circular morality, others linear cause-based systems. Human ethics was a tangle of overlapping decisions, situational principles, and handwritten notes scrawled into the margins. At the bottom, in red, triage protocol, Sea Earth, War Front, epidemic subset. Yirval tapped it. The human section of the class didn't flinch. The rest leaned forward cautiously, as if unsure whether it was polite to look directly at it. "We are going to discuss what humans call the worst seat in the galaxy," Yirval said. "Triage decision points." That was when Railuan interrupted. Railuan, a tall-throated, soft-spined Sechelin student, wore diplomatic blues and always spoke with the poise of someone groomed for negotiation since egg hatch. He had stayed silent the week before. Now, his ridged eyes narrowed. "Why," he said, "are we studying human death rituals instead of preventing death altogether?" Yirval didn't answer immediately, but Lars turned his head slightly. Railuan continued. "Their ethics are built around catastrophe. It's reactive, always responding to crisis. Why should we learn from a species that treats morality as damage control?" The tension in the room shifted. A few nods from the alien section. Even the Falari, who'd previously curled inwards, now sat straighter. Gregor, the miner, leaned forward. You think we want it to be like that? You function in chaos, Ryluin pressed. You adapt to disaster instead of building systems to avoid it. Vega stood up slowly. And what do you do when your system fails? Ryluin tilted his head. It doesn't. Lars finally spoke, not loudly. Then you've never been at the edge of a failing dome with only 12 oxygen masks and 16 people. Ryluin turned to him, politely condescending. I'm sure your medical instincts are noble, but that doesn't make them ethical. Lars gave a tired smile. I don't need them to be noble. I just need them to work. Yerval raised a hand. Enough. This is a space for exchange, not accusation. But the damage was done. A schism had formed. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something closer to intellectual rejection. The alien students weren't frightened by the humans, they were repelled by what they represented, survival that demanded compromise. Later that cycle, after class, Lars walked alone through the station's arboretum ring. Artificial gravity gave the illusion of weight, but the curve of the path still bent strangely underfoot. The blue giant hung in the sky like a silent observer. He didn't notice Ryluin approaching until his footsteps echoed through the chamber's humidity regulator. I didn't mean to offend you, the Sechelin said. You didn't, Lars replied. You seemed frustrated. I'm tired. Ryluin folded his hands behind his back. May I ask something? Lars glanced sideways. If you had raised your hand, last week, if you had killed, would it have changed anything? Lars didn't answer immediately. He stopped walking, looked up at the glowing sky through the dome. I think about that more than you know. He sat on a bench by a low-oxygen fern. Ryluin hesitated, then joined him. I don't want to live in a world where ethics is about choosing who dies, Ryluin said softly. Neither do I, Lars replied, but sometimes that's all you've got. He didn't say it like an excuse, just a fact. You ever intubated someone in zero gravity while the bulkhead behind you buckled? Lars asked. Stabilized a burn victim using 2 clamps and a dental laser while a hull fire crept down a wall? Ryluin was silent. I don't glorify what we do, none of us do, but sometimes survival is ugly. Ryluin shifted uncomfortably. You think that gives humans moral superiority? Lars laughed once, a short breath through his nose. We're not superior, we're just used to being unprepared. They sat in silence for a while. Then Lars said, You think I sleep well? After triage? After choosing who doesn't get the oxygen? Ryluin didn't answer. Lars turned, and for the first time, Ryluin noticed something in his eyes, not coldness, but restraint. A dam built from experience. There was pain in there, but none of it leaked out. Lars rose. I'm glad you've never had to choose, Ryluin. I hope you never have to. He walked away without looking back. Back in the dorms that night, the human students gathered an unspoken arrangement. No uniforms, no ranks, just mugs of thick liquid and quiet breathing. I'm tired of being dissected like a case study, Gregor muttered. Like we're anomalies. We are anomalies, Vega said. To them. They act like we want to be. Lars sat in the corner, wrapping an elastic bandage around his wrist. Just muscle tension, a strain from the last emergency shift he pulled on Deck 7. One of the alien staff had a reaction to standard inoculation, and he'd stabilized them with his bare hands while 2 other medics were off shift. No one asked about the bandage. They all knew the signs. Work never stopped for Lars. They think we're dangerous, one of the newer cadets said. We are, Vega replied, but not because we want to be. Across the station, in Yerval's quarters, the professor stared at his syllabus. Week 12. The Ethics of Humanity. It was no longer hypothetical. It was a minefield. He reread Lars's file. Top of his field. Honorable discharge from Earth's Planetary Response Corps. 3 medals for non-combat service under fire. 7 recommendations for promotion turned down every time. Why? Because he kept requesting frontline posts. Yerval turned off the screen and stared out at the blue giant. He'd taught ethics for a century, but never had a student made him question the core assumption of his curriculum. Not until Lars. The emergency drills ran longer that week. It wasn't a coincidence. After the incident in ethics, the Institute's Administrative Council issued a station-wide recertification order. All species were to review evacuation protocols, escape route familiarity, life support prioritization systems, and triage strategy. Lars had tried to opt out. He wasn't a student anymore. His placement at the Galactic Peace Institute was as part of the Interstellar Humanitarian Exchange, a medical observer and occasional guest lecturer, not a combat medic, not a frontline coordinator. But the council insisted. Representative knowledge sharing, they called it. So, Lars found himself in a simulated habitat dome with 15 alien students and 2 instructors. The lights were set to flicker. The temperature shifted erratically. Smoke effects hissed from the wall vents. Begin scenario, the instructor said. Dome decompression, multiple injured. You have 4 minutes to assess. Chaos erupted. The aliens scattered to each dummy, foam-padded, biometrically rigged replicas of different species, each programmed with a randomized injury. Lars crouched next to the first, a Talon hatchling replica with simulated thoracic trauma. He ran a scan, non-repairable without a thoracic stent, which they didn't have in the kit. Talon Young couldn't survive reduced pressure long. He stood and moved on. Internal bleeding, not urgent, then a compound fracture stabilizable. By the second minute, he was directing the students, calmly but firmly. Leave the Corin, she'll survive depressurization for 10 minutes. You, wrap that limb and administer blue fluid only. Don't use red, it'll clot too fast. Ryluan hesitated beside him. This feels wrong. Lars didn't stop moving. You want to save everyone? Yes. So do I. But you're leaving 3 behind. I'm saving 5. You're choosing. Lars finally looked at him. That's what triage is. When the alarm cut off, the simulation froze. The room swam back to sterile calm. 12 out of 15 simulated patients had survived. The instructor blinked in approval. Impressive, especially under uncertainty. Lars didn't respond. He just removed his gloves and stepped back, breathing steady. Later, in the debrief, Ryluan sat with his hands clenched. I understand the logic, he said to the instructor, but I don't know if I can do it. Pick who dies. You're not expected to. Not yet, the instructor replied, but someone must. He glanced at Lars. Some already have. The next ethics lecture was packed again. Students who hadn't attended all term were now cramming into corners, audio feeds broadcasting live to study rooms across the station. The topic was supposed to be interpersonal ethics between non-hive species. No one cared. Professor Yerval opened with a quote this time, but not from a philosopher, from a field medic's report. We mark the ones we can't save so we don't waste time trying again. He let the words hang in the air. I do not share this to horrify, he said, but to confront. He turned to Lars. Would you be willing to speak? Lars hesitated. His hands twitched slightly, an old sign of fatigue, Vega noticed. She'd seen it during orbital drills back on Luna Base, before they shipped out for training together. It meant he hadn't slept. Again. He rose anyway. I'm not here to scare anyone, Lars began, his voice quiet but clear. I'm not here to justify what humans do. I'm here because sometimes we don't get the luxury of clean choices. He stepped away from his seat and stood closer to the middle. You asked last week if ethics could exist in crisis. The truth is, we don't know until we're in one. He paused, then turned toward the class. There was a collapse on Arcos 3, mining station, orbital ring failure. 200 wounded, 34 trapped under a bulkhead. It took 14 hours for extraction teams to cut through. He inhaled, slowly. I was there for the first 10. No one moved. I had to decide who got pain relief. We only had 30 doses. I gave a double dose to a Zarian whose spine had split because she was screaming so loud it was causing panic in the others. I used up 4 on her. She died anyway. A rustle of feathers from the Illyrian student. No one else spoke. I performed emergency surgery on the floor of a maintenance corridor with no sedatives. I asked a patient if they wanted to be held down or if they wanted to bite a cable sheath. He looked at the floor. She apologized before she screamed. Yerval's fingers flexed. I stabilized 24 patients that cycle. 18 survived. He let the numbers settle. That's not a win. That's just the math. A hand raised slowly. Not Ryluan. A thin Avenari student, violet-skinned and tremulous, with translucent lungs visible beneath her carapace. Why do you keep doing it? She asked. Lars didn't hesitate. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. The simplicity of the answer struck harder than any philosophy. Yerval closed his notes. For once, there was nothing to add. That evening, Yerval sent a private message to Lars. Would you consider co-teaching the Ethics of Humanity unit? I believe the students would benefit from a perspective forged in actual decision-making. Lars didn't reply right away. Instead, he went to the observatory deck. It was mostly empty that time of day. The stars were scattered like fractures across the dark. He sat there for an hour. Only when the blue giant began its slow rotation across the viewport did he answer. Yes, but only if we also teach them how to prevent what we've lived through. In the following days, the tone shifted across the institute. The ethics discussions evolved from detached theory into real debate. Students questioned frameworks, challenged assumptions. The human students were still treated cautiously, but no longer like anomalies. Lars led a guest seminar on medical ethics in crisis zones. He didn't lecture, he told stories. He described a girl who refused morphine because her mother needed it more. A soldier who used their last breath to direct Lars toward another trapped survivor. A technician with a crushed pelvis who insisted on singing through her own operation so others wouldn't panic. He didn't dramatize. He didn't soften. One alien student, an Othari, usually unshakable, asked to leave midway through. Another wept quietly behind a desk. Vega watched from the back. She noticed Lars' hands again. The tremor hadn't stopped, but he kept going. Later, Ryluin approached Lars in the corridor outside the medical wing. I thought ethics was about choosing the right thing, he said. It is, Lars replied. But in every story you told, there wasn't a right thing, just choices. That's still ethics, Lars said. It's just ethics with blood on its hands. Ryluin was quiet for a long time. I've started updating the Sechelin medical codes. We never accounted for scarcity conditions. It's hard to adapt. Lars nodded. It always is. Ryluin's eyes lowered. I still don't know if I could make those choices. Lars looked at him gently. Then I hope you never have to. By the time week 12 arrived, the syllabus no longer mattered. The lecture hall had been reassigned to one of the large interspecies auditoriums, the kind normally reserved for diplomatic summits or cross-coalition votes. Now, its stage bore a simple projection, the ethics of humanity. There were no guards at the door this time. They weren't needed. Aliens from over 30 systems attended. Some sat on magnetic perches, others hovered using gas bladders. Many brought translators, though most had begun to understand Terran cadence on their own. Across the front row sat the original students, Vega, Gregor, Ryluin, and the others who'd turned one question into a curriculum shift. And at the center podium stood Lars. He wore the same uniform he always had, medical, white, clean, quiet, but something was different, not in appearance, in gravity. Professor Yerval stood beside him, not as a lecturer, but as a moderator. Even he had stopped pretending this was just another seminar. Lars didn't begin with a story, or a quote, or a joke. He started with a scan. Projected in the air was a three-dimensional medical readout: heart rate, oxygenation, internal pressure, skeletal structure, human anatomy, under stress. This is what it looks like, Lars said, when a body is dying of crush trauma. The room held still. These are readings taken on Outpost 7, he continued, a deep mining colony struck by a gravitational quake. I was the first responder inside the core shaft. He rotated the scan: broken ribs, collapsed lung, internal bleeding, a heartbeat spiking, then plummeting. She lived, he added, but only because I was willing to cut open her chest with the corner of a snapped beam and use a bent oxygen nozzle as a stent. A muffled sound passed through the room, not horror, reverence. She doesn't remember any of it, which is a blessing, but I do. He flicked to the next scan, then the next. He let them play in sequence, data cascading across the room, none of them survivors. I'm not here to teach you how to save lives, Lars said. I'm here to explain what it costs to try. A pause. Humanity adapts. That's what you've heard. That's what frightens some of you. We don't wait for permission. We improvise. We survive. He looked directly at the crowd now. But that doesn't make us fearless. It doesn't make us unbreakable. It just means we keep moving even after we're cracked open. One of the Gorth twins made a deep, low rumble their species sound for sorrow. Lars gestured for lights. The scans vanished. The full room came into view again. He stepped forward. In ethics class, he said, you asked us who had killed. Quiet again. You should have asked who had chosen. Now even the translators paused, digesting that single word. Because the thing that marks a human isn't how many enemies they've shot or how many lives they've saved, it's how many impossible decisions they've carried, and whether they can keep carrying them. Vega watched from the third row. She'd seen Lars in surgery, soaked in plasma, sleeves rolled to his elbows. She'd seen him during breakdowns, when the adrenaline wore off and the quiet started eating at him. And now she saw him like this, clear-eyed, calm, unwilling to let the pain define him but never pretending it hadn't shaped him. Ryluan raised a hand from the audience. Lars nodded. What do we do? Ryluan asked carefully. When the right choice and the only choice aren't the same? Lars took a moment. You remember the difference, he said. Yerval stepped forward. I once believed ethics was about preserving life at all costs, the professor said. But I've come to see that it is just as much about the weight of preserving your own humanity. He turned to Lars. You've shown us the edge of that weight. Lars gave a small nod, and I hope none of you ever have to carry it. After the lecture, the hall emptied slowly. Conversations buzzed in low, reflective tones. A few students stayed behind. One approached Lars, a young Vashari, gelatinous limbs and bright, flickering eyes. I thought you were going to tell us how strong humans are, she said. I did, Lars replied. She frowned. Not in your bodies, he clarified. In how we get back up. Even when you fail? Especially when we fail. She blinked once, then offered a small nod and drifted off. Outside the hall, Vega was waiting. Yerval's already talking about a permanent curriculum update, she said. You've managed to turn ethics into a practical course. Lars gave a dry smile. That's not what I set out to do. But it's what needed to happen. They started walking toward the inner ring. The station was quieter now, like the weight of the lecture still hung in the vents. Vega nudged his elbow. Still not going to raise your hand? No. She nodded. You could. At this point, watching someone die might be worse. Lars glanced sideways. I know. They reached a viewport overlooking the maintenance docks. 2 small repair shuttles were drifting back into cradle. The blue giant pulsed in the sky, like a reminder of how vast and fragile everything was. I sometimes wonder, Lars said, if anyone ever tells the dead they're sorry. Vega didn't answer right away. Do you? Every time. They stood there together, neither speaking, just breathing in the soft hum of station life. Professor Yerval filed the new course outline that evening. The Ethics of Humanity. Newly required curriculum for all first-year students. Included was a case study based on Lars' work. No simulations, no hypotheticals, just his notes, his choices, his regrets. The final line of the syllabus read, Do not attempt to replicate the strength of humanity. Attempt to understand the cost. Lars returned to his quarters late. He removed his badge and sat on the edge of his bunk. He reached into a small metal case tucked in a drawer and pulled out a folded paper, the only non-digital item he carried. A handwritten letter from a girl who hadn't survived Arcos 3. He didn't read it. He just held it. Outside, the station spun gently around the blue star. Life moved. Classes resumed. New arguments would rise. But in a quiet room on Deck 6, a medic who had never killed sat alone, remembering every life he couldn't save. And still he got up the next morning to try again.